Hey guys, it's Matt. Welcome back to Midnight Reality. The main thing I wanted to talk about today, although I'll be talking about a lot of different topics, is something I've mentioned a few times in the past, something very few people talk about, but a major reason behind what they did to the world and did to us, CV 2020. One of the main reasons, not talked about much, is they wanted to see or conduct a test as to how the fake reality replenishes itself. The only way to do that is to get everybody locked away, to take economic activity down as close as zero as absolutely possible without people starving. You still have to have bread and milk flowing and some basics, and the electricity needs to turn on. They took economic activity around the world to as low as possible, and they conducted a test. Now, they don't ever do their dastardly deeds for one thing. They always get 3 or 4 major outcomes, major positives from their sick perspective out of whatever they do. But I'm very confident. I'm sure all the old guard are shaking their heads like, yeah, Matt, we can see that. But it still might be interesting to really dive into here in this presentation. And if anybody's new and have no idea what I just said, what do you mean a replenishment or replacement of the fake earth? Or let's talk about the oil wells, for example. They had ideas, I believe the Not Nilk and its minions and its creeps, they generally know how this reality works. But to really conduct an experiment, you need to get everybody locked away. Again, take economic activity down to as close to zero as possible. And then observe the Jeddah and Riyadh Saudi oil wells and see how they replenish themselves, as the earth generally does this on its own and much more quickly than people realize. If this was the completely closed system and just purely physical, certainly don't believe in Neil of the Grass-Fed's description of the cosmos, but if it was purely physical and there wasn't a bunch of supernatural horse shit going on here, things we just can't explain, or maybe, even though I call it a fake reality, the earth as a living system. I mean, that is probably a more accurate way to talk about it. It fixes itself. It as it gets sick, it can heal itself very quickly, which was proven in CV 2020. And as usual, they have to give the truth away, whether that's by contract or they just get off on it. First few weeks of CV 2020, I will never forget. The article started coming in, and I've said this many times, but I can't talk about it enough. The swans are returning to the canals of Venice. Just in a few weeks, the canals of Venice were being cleaned up. We all observed the sky. It looked like what we remember from the 1970s and 80s, where I'd say lying at the pool, on a towel at the pool, looking up at the billowing clouds without the streaks and the haze of tails of chemicals. The sky looked different. The earth literally started cleaning itself up in a matter of weeks. And I think they know generally how it works, and they observed everything from the atmosphere, the readings on this, the ocean, toxicity, and the oil wells. Just as Egg Chen told us in Big Trouble in Little China, it's the black blood of the earth. And Jack Burton said, "You mean oil?" "No, Jack, I mean the black blood of the earth." Do you think every animal in known existence made its way to Riyadh or Jeddah, its own form of pilgrimage, and it died over the oil well spot? I mean, even if that happened, every single insect going back to the dawn of time made its own little pilgrimage to Riyadh and Jeddah to die in that one spot to contribute to the magnitude of the oil wells. Even if that happened, which is absolutely ridiculous, now China has a few more 100 million cars on the road in the last 15 years. There's no way it could sustain. Just think of the amount of gasoline and petrol and oil. Think of the hundreds of millions of cars and airplanes. And come on, 90% of the oil wells would have dried up 25 years ago. These oil wells, just like my professor at Penn State told us in that class in 1990, he said, we have 10 years. And they all believed it. And they didn't, of course, Not Nilk doesn't share with those professors in universities. Not Nilk knew it back then, doesn't share with the university professors that the earth is a living system that replenishes itself. And it is much more accurate to describe oil as Egg Chen did, the black blood of the earth, than describe it as some sort of carbon goo from every animal that ever died. I mean, that's ridiculous. Well, Matt, oil's been looked at under a microscope maybe 10,000 times. The scientists understand exactly what its composition is and have determined it can only be coming from decaying animals. Really? Really? See, that's, again, the trick of this reality. Scientists do their tens of thousands of different types of tests. The reality provides what's called empirical data, empirical evidence, whatever that is. I have no idea. And that provides the scientists a rationale, or they then have a theory on what is happening. But the original data coming in is from the trick itself. That's what reality does. That's what the Knottnook understands very well, but the university research professors have no clue about. And why does reality do this? If I'm right, could you imagine if somebody stumbled upon this video? Because the entire reality, it's the first sentence of what to learn in terms of going through this life. The entire reality is a gigantic trick, and the basis of the trick, its primary purpose, is to convince you of the material side, not the spiritual side, to stack up evidence about the body. Carbon, six. Somebody had the comment the other day, which got a Pootie Tang award about, Matt, did you see the 666? Did you know it's 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons in the carbon atom? And I went, yeah, Pootie Tang award. We covered that about 40 years ago, but I'm just, come on, don't take your ball and go home. Everybody, actually, some people are looking for a Pootie Tang award. Maybe you did that on purpose. The whole reality lays down 99% of everything it gives us is to reaffirm or to convince people about the material side of themselves, the physical side, and that's all they are, the body. Not the atheist side isn't the best way to say it, but it doesn't ever provide any evidence we can use on the, at least Knottnook reality, on the spiritual side. It either mocks that side or pretends that side of us doesn't exist. Rule of opposites, reality gives itself away. If it spends all its time, including the basis of the trick and the evidence that comes into university research scientists, showing how physical and material and real everything is, the rule of opposites clearly tells us then that's not who we are. It's the greatest news of all time.
You're such a negative channel. I'm tired of coming to the channel. It's so damn negative.
It's the greatest, not negative, it's the greatest news of all time. So back to the main reason for me making this video. At some point, whether it be 10 years before CV 2020 or whether Albert Pike planned it, they got together, probably in the form of a monkey, and somebody said in front of the floating Baphomet from Bill's poster, we understand how regenerative the fake reality is, and these idiots, the great unwashed, believe we have these people like Neil of the Grass-Fed and Mitch Pikachu telling about the Milky Way and billions of galaxies and pulsars and quasars. We have them still believing in that. Do they still believe in a moon land? They still believe in a landing, an Apollo landing. Can you believe that? How stupid are these people? They said that in their own meeting. They said, we understand how this regenerative fake reality works, but we really need to collect some real data. We need to understand exactly how regenerative it is. And we got a sense of it. This is the Knottnook talking to themselves, and Bill Gates is sitting in the back pouring coffee. He says, we need to really get to the bottom of it. We can only go so far with our AI modeling. What are we going to do? I'll get to that. Shut up. We need to get everybody locked away in their home, take all economic output activity, the factory activity, take it down collectively for the West, take it down to under 5% for at least 2 or 3 months to really gauge how regenerative this fake reality is. Then we can use it for our own benefits, right? We can manipulate it then. That's right. Of course, we're going to, whatever we learn, we're going to use it for our own sick benefit. Of course. Are you new here, sir? Of course they're going to. But then how do we get everybody locked away? I'll get to that. Shut up. The floating Baphomet said, there's going to be a very serious illness. Really? It's going to, we're going to start all these rumors. We're going to start rumors from Wuhan, China. We're going to tie in some weird ass conspiracy evidence through video games. Remember that? What was that video game that predicted the Wuhan? We're going to tie in the Olympics. We're going to tie in this and that. We're going to people all sorts of confused. There's going to be all sorts of fucked up. But in the end, they'll succumb to fear. And the people in Melbourne will be afraid to go across the street, not because they're afraid to be with their neighbor, but because the authorities will get them if they cross the street. How we go? They're not going to do that. People aren't going to stay at home for months and just go out for just the basics and then work from home while we gauge how regenerative is. Yes, they will. Yes, they will do this. In fact, we can basically get them to do it in 4 to 6 weeks. Really? We're that good now? We can? With us? 4 to 6 weeks. We'll get them to comply. Now, we have a lot of other things we're going to achieve as we do this, of course. We've got a whole new, our mRNA type things we're gonna give them, and we're gonna track that. And everything we do is a gigantic test. But at least this part of the test, we will immediately start gauging how regenerative this fake reality is. We'll watch the oil wells refill. We'll watch the skies get clean. We'll watch the salinity content in the ocean. We'll observe the Amazon rainforest to see how much it comes back just in a matter of months. We'll watch the endangered species populations, see how they multiply, maybe starting just in a matter of weeks. This Earth is extremely regenerative, the floating Baphomet says to the minions in the audience in the form of a monkey. Even Chernobyl. Now let Matt come back here and say, we have, let's just say we're slightly skeptical of what has been presented. But even if, let's just say most of it is real, let's say there was we know, right down the way here is Limerick Nuclear Power Plant, and Limerick Nuclear Power Plant provides nuclear power to a big part of this region. Maybe there was an accident. Let's just go with that. I know some people are triggered. They want to take their ball and go home. I know this Matt wasn't legit. Everything in the world has to be fake. You're not a real truther. Right now, I don't really buy what they're telling me about Chernobyl. But in this example, again, just run with it. Even if it was a real accident, potentially, I know there's been videos where people go out there now with their little Geiger counters and they roam around. They're like, it's not that bad here. And then there's supposedly a hole punched in the, that's all not milk too. There's a hole punched in the containment unit from a drone strike because of the war between Ukraine and Russia. That's all not milk. No drone hit it by accident. The not milk's putting that out now, of course, 100% intentionally. But people go out to Chernobyl and they're like, it's really not unsafe. I mean, the radiation's very low. Well, even in terms of what I'm saying here, even if there was a real accident, believe the Earth is regenerative. It's a living system. It can even clean that up. So they've said, nuclear. If there's ever any sort of an accident, it takes millions of years for the radiation level to drop to a certain threshold where it would be safe again. No, because we see now the Earth is very regenerative. What they say takes millions of years may take 10 years. That we're living on some sort of a living system here, whether it's the Matrix, whether it's an illusion, a fake, it doesn't matter. It's still regenerative, and it's as long as we're here, it seems real. It doesn't matter what it is. It certainly isn't a rock floating through space. I mean, that's the last thing it potentially could be. Believing what Mitch Pikachu would say, or what the moon is, and rock and dust. That's the last thing any idiot should believe. So in this example, I'm debating Mitch Pikachu. We're at the Oxford Union Debate Hall where Terrence Howard claimed 1 + 1 is 2. Remember that? Where they let him in there and they won't let me in there. But I'm debating Mitch Pikachu. So Mitch, come on, tell we all know what you're going to say, but tell the audience what you believe the moon is. He says, well, everybody. I can't do his accent. Everybody knows what the moon is. Just tell the audience what the moon is. Well, it's composed of rock, it's so much igneous rock versus sedimentary rock and dust. And rule of opposites. You just said it's rock and dust and it's some rock floating through space. Rule of opposites, that means it's not that. So we can end the debate. Everybody can go to lunch now. He said it's this. Then we know it's not that. Matt, could it be that simple? Pretty much. And one more time, because I'll never forget the headline. It was such a not milk giveaway. The swans are returning to the canals of Venice. This is just 2 to 3 weeks or so after everyone was locked away. At least that's how I remember it. And I thought, there's something to this. This has not milk written all over it. Do I believe the swans really were returning to Venice? Of course. But where were they? I thought, well, where were the swans? I don't know. But either way, even if it's false, it's the way of not milk is telling us how quickly this place regenerates, how quickly it can be cleaned up. So to finish up this topic, and we'll talk in a minute about all the other things they accomplished from CV 2020. But to finish up here, who knows what they learned about the regenerative powers of what is called Earth. I mean, maybe they used it to reassess how long the U.S. dollar system and the fiat currency system with the $35 or $40 trillion currently of debt can keep going, because it's all tied to the petrodollar. And maybe that was something that was very concerning to them, that even though the Earth is regenerative and you have all these new hundreds of millions of cars and the rise of China, they might say, even though the black blood of the Earth can replenish itself, we're pushing it. This is another Not Milk meeting where they took the form of a monkey. We're pushing it. It could go dry. So what we will need to do is, everything they do is a test and a retest on the real spiritual being. Or I don't know how many of us there are here. It could also be a test of the general NPC population to see how they react. But maybe they thought, well, okay, if the wells are about to go dry, and that's all tied into the petrodollar, and the whole system would go down. If there was a complete oil shortage, they might have said to themselves, we've learned that we can cook up an illness, a bogus illness, very, very quickly. And once we can get people locked away, even for a short-term period, they may have learned just 2 months, we can find these poor devils to their home. That will be enough for the wells to get back on the right side of red versus black in terms of, are they regenerating? Are they filling back up? Or are they being drained? Who knows what they learned? But everything they do is a test and a retest, and they keep learning, and they never stop, and they never congratulate themselves. Not Milk Minions, and I'm sure many of you are listening to this, you are a worthy adversary, but a real sick group of bastards. Okay, that is one of the main reasons for CV 2020, to test and to finally, from a Not Milk's perspective, have a real experiment on the regenerative powers of what this thing is called Earth. Now, that's probably not the primary reason they did it, of course. They did it for many reasons, but everything they do is a test. See, even the renting of the movie, Action Jacksonation, starring Carl Weathers, and the mRNA, the first grade truthers just don't understand. Almost everything they do is a test. There's very little they've done up to this point, which is the final, which is a bit concerning, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The first grade truth. Oh, here comes the renting of the Carl Weathers movie. Of course, this was test number 2. Let's just get right into it. The renting of the movie at Blockbuster with Carl Weathers, the Action Jacksonation. Oh, and what did the first grade and the fifth grade up to fifth grade truthers start talking about? And as far as I know, they still haven't apologized. Here comes the genocide. Oh my God, it's going to coal the whole population. Hundreds of millions here, wiped out. Hundreds of millions are there. And let's listen to this guy, old man in a chair. And then they use the word genocide, and they still haven't apologized. No, you haven't learned you haven't learned much about your adversary here, your spiritual adversary. Almost everything they do is a test. They're not even close to fully understanding the real spiritual being. Who knows what egg they're going to drop on our heads if they fully figure it out. But no, even the renting of the movie, mRNA, they are completely in test phase. To come out and say, oh, hundreds of millions are going to be gone and this and that. And I understand there were adverse events. Okay, let's address the people yelling at their screen right now. I'm not aware of these issues. When you put billions of things of liquid vials, billions into people's arms, billions and billions, there's going to be adverse events. There's going to be all sorts of this and that and death, of course. But that's not what they were going for. I said that as it was happening. What are you people talking about? If they wanted to wipe out their livestock, they would have done it 100 or 150 years ago. I said it as it was happening, not just now after the fact. We know it's what I said. Yes, there were all sorts of adverse events, but that's what happens when you put billions of things into people's arms. It was not about that. It was about trying to get away with making people go kaput. Come on, man. We know that now. And people still hold on to that, which is bizarre because we know what happened. We're here. It's 2025. It's just the beginning stages of these tests. of putting something in the body that manipulates RNA coding off DNA. They're just in the very beginning of that, in my opinion. 99% from the Not-Nilk's perspective, whatever you call mRNA, it was a gigantic test and experiment. The outcome, or whatever they're going to ultimately do with it, might be 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years away. Okay, the first grade truther has no comprehension about how the Not-Nilk actually does business. Okay, here's an example. There's no basis for this. I just made it up. But I think the old guard would say that's generally how the Not-Nilk does business, Matt, and maybe you're onto something here. Ultimately, we know they want to move the real spiritual being slowly down the sliding scale more towards the digital, whatever that means. Someday stepping into a digital world, agreeing to a reality that's even more fake than the one that we're in, one more layer down towards the hell realm. Whether the VR glasses and those big things you put on the headsets doesn't seem to be working for them. They might bypass that stage altogether. This relates to why there's so much magenta bleeding through reality. Sorry if you're new, we're not going to do a 1 hour sidebar on the magenta. To me, there's a lot of symptoms in this world as to the steps the creeps are taking in the Not-Nilk to move the real spiritual being down the sliding scale more towards the digital, right? That removes, in my opinion, it further isolates what you know of as you from the spiritual side of you. If one day you decide to live in a realm that's even more fake, the digital, or the download of consciousness, or what Ray Kurzweil was proposing, or the brain chip. Everything they do, remember, it's one sentence. It's to remove the real spiritual being from its understanding of who it is, the spiritual side, and it seems like the ultimate goal is they want to actually cut it off, not just remove somebody's understanding of it, but to potentially isolate it and cut the spiritual side off, maybe from the physical side. Who knows? Now, again, this is just a sci-fi example. Somehow, to get a real spiritual being in their AI modeling 50 years from now, they've modeled out with their digital twins to get somebody to choose the digital world, which further isolates them from their spiritual self. I don't know. They need something. They need something that gets back to the reason for the renting of the movie In the Arm Action Jacksonation. It's something to do with mRNA related to DNA. I don't know. How would I know? But see, you're saying, Matt, potentially the billions and billions of renting of the movie, billions and billions of injections of the VCR tape was just a first step, just a tiny little test across a 50-year period to eventually get the real spiritual being to agree to live in a digital world, to cut themselves off from their spiritual selves. Yes, I'm saying that's possible. Again, this is a sci-fi example that I just made up. Again, the old guard might say that's kind of what they do. But in terms of this just being step 5 of 50 steps they have to take, that's much more accurate than the 1st through 5th grade truthers that thought the renting of the VCR tape put into the shoulder of the arm itself was the end in and of itself. That is ridiculous, and that's 1st grade truth. Thinking what came in 2021 from Moderna and Pfizer was the end in and of itself is so short-sighted. If you should be embarrassed to call yourself a truth researcher, you actually should give it up and go clear fields. So in summary, what did they get out of putting billions and billions of VCR tapes into people's shoulders and the punky boosters on top? Some people have had 5, 6 punky boosters. What'd they get out of it? Nobody knows. We don't know. We may never know. The 1st grade truther that says they know and people went kaput, as I said just a few seconds ago, the height of ignorance. We don't know. But I do know one thing, and I'm sure of this. It was just the initial steps in terms of a very, very long-term plan. This son of a bitch is patient. So let's move on to the third major thing that the Not-Nilk got out of the 2020 event. And it's so obvious we won't spend a lot of time here, but there's a few important things that need to be said. 2020 was the largest psychological experiment ever conducted on what they call a human population to a factor of 1 billion. Nothing comes close. The 7-Eleven job application submission in 2001 was nothing compared to what happened in 2020. And the way they moved people to action, to stay at home, to be afraid, to become a Karen. They're still COVIDing now. They're still doing it. Andrew sends me the stuff. Still COVIDing. Bill sends me the stuff. Jennifer Gardner's and what's his name? Ben Affleck. He plays himself too. Not with himself. He plays himself in movies. He has no acting range. Their kids are still COVIDing. They when they walk the beach at Kennebunkport or wherever they go with the Obamas, they force the kids are still COVIDing. They force everybody to be in a mask. I'm not even joking. Bill sent me something about this the other day. So when 2020 moved a population to do a variety of different things or to act in a certain way, again, that was not an end in and of itself. It was the collection of data, the experiment, then collecting the data up for the AI and the digital twinning, the AI modeling. It wasn't to get people to do what they actually did. It was to observe how quickly they did it, who rejected, why. The collecting of the data was far more important in 2020 through 2021 than what anybody actually did. This is what the first grade truther does not understand. So in a way, 2020 through 2022 was a massive marketing experiment to the trillionth power. Here is an example of a marketing experiment, and this is just 1/1 trillionth of what they accomplished. But I didn't even learn this at Penn State in the marketing classes. The university, of course, didn't teach me anything I could use. I read some books about real strategies, and I never employed them. I never sold no Chinese product from a Foxconn factory or anything, but it was very interesting, some of these books I read, where whatever product or service you're selling, and even back before the internet, you'd take out a half page in a newspaper, and you'd create 10 headlines about shocking new discovery, whatever it may be, new product takes off 10 pounds, or fat people rejoice, or whatever. You run 10 different headlines in different parts of the country. And when one headline likely will start to outsell the others 2-1, and when that happens, you immediately drop the other campaigns around the country in newspapers. This is before the internet. And then go with the one that works. So immediately you start with 10 different eye-catching headlines, for example. Now, this is rudimentary marketing 101. You're selling some Foxconn piece of junk, some 2D battery vacuum plastic piece of shit vacuum cleaner so you can get under the cat hair under the couch or whatever. But this is just 1/1 trillionth of what they did during 2020 through 2022. Framing the headlines, constantly reassessing, AI, digital twinning, what caused the most fear, what type of news headline drove people into action. I mean, incredible how evil genius this thing is and the data that it collected up. And think about this, how bizarre is this to anybody listening to me from the family that listens to my videos but doesn't ever call me, doesn't ever tell me they listen, doesn't ever ask me any question, just assumes I kind of went bad at one point or went crazy, or your uncle or your cousins believe how crazy you are. All that we're talking about here in terms of what it really accomplished, they think it was just about people trying to Dr. F and people trying to help people stay safe. This is incredible to me. Think about that. They think, the people around you think it doesn't always work properly, Matt, and governments are too big and they're inefficient and there's red tape, but ultimately they wanted to do the right thing. We know now they didn't have to shut the whole world down, but people just wanted people to stay safe, and they generally care even though they're misguided. And oh my God, that's what they would still come back to us with. Oh my God. So coming back to add this in, a summary of part 3, it's just to collect up data, psychological data, to better understand different types of entities here, different types of spiritual beings, and what they're most interested in, of course, how the real spiritual being acts, how many push back, how many are now on the ship of fools. A gigantic psychological experiment. Once again, not an end in and of itself, a reason or way to collect more data about the real spiritual being. So there are 3 main classifications as to what the Nautnuk was out to accomplish via 2020 through 2022. But inside the third, the psychology side, there is a million subheadings inside the third. I mean, just even the balance that they tried to achieve between getting those on purpose to dissent. I always called it the 80-20 rule. It was probably more like 85-15. They needed, of course, the friction. They needed millions and millions to say, I'll never do it. I'll never rent it. They needed families to break apart and say, if you do that, I'll never talk to you again. That was a giant loosh experiment. But I said, right when it was happening, I said, some of these first grade truthers are saying they're pushing everybody to go do it, to do everything they say. And that's not how the not milk works. They always want friction. They always want a group to dissent or to rebel, which creates friction. This is what the RFK Jr. and all the those that we would say are completely on the ship of not milk, seemingly running around, telling us what we want to hear or saying things that we would want said about the dangers of it. Or it's all by design, not milk. Most of what comes out of Tucker Carlson. I mean, there's actually people here that listen to Tucker Carlson. I mean, believing somehow that he's on our side. I would think there's few people here at this channel, because this is the very definition of these old terms we used to throw around, like controlled opposition. They need the friction. They need the loosh. They never want 100% of the population to do what they say. Just sitting here thinking for a few minutes, in terms of that third classification, the psychological side, there's so many thousands of things that could be discussed at length. I'm just thinking back to, I collected up for the old book, the original old book, I guess A Reality Few Can See, called The Sinister List. I put this together. I said, I want to collect up all these things that are truly sinister that this not milk is doing during the period of 2020 through 2023. I called the sinister list, one of which was you couldn't go see your elderly grandmother in the home, right? Or one person every 2 days could visit, and she could come to the glass and you just look at her through the glass. I mean, this is as sinister and as evil as it gets. But again, it's all under the psychological side. Not just to collect information about the real spiritual being, but in this particular instance, it did thousands of these experiments. How far could it push people to reach what it would consider in their AI modeling or digital twin, the breaking point? And I think it's always surprised that it ends up pushing farther into than maybe even the AI modeling expected. In other words, they probably thought, in terms of all the sinister things we're going to lay down on the population, the 15 horrible things we're going to do, seeing Granny through the glass, or all the other things, nobody can walk on a beach. There's nothing more healthy during the time of than walking on a beach with the breeze coming off the ocean, and there's just nothing that could be better. But you're going to be arrested if you go on the beach. I think whenever they do this, they have a certain mark where they say, we think we can push people right up to this level. And I think almost every single time the people are so lost, they're so gone, that they say, we could have pushed him a little farther. We were actually being conservative. As usual, they would have bent over and taken even more of it, our AI modeling says. Very rarely do they say, we pushed too far, and we now have about 400,000 people that are at the breaking point, and we need to really back off quickly. That almost never happens. So, again, it's all about test, retest, test. Just play this over again for, say, 7 hours. Test, retest, test, put that on loop for 7, 8, 10 hours. That's how many times they test, retest before they're, they're ways away from laying down the big one. And whatever that may be, I don't even think it will be in my lifetime. This is a very patient thing. And the first grade truther thinks it needs to act by the end of the week. No, if it's this separate entity or sequential incarnation that Tony says, and we no matter what's right or wrong about that, it is different from you. The Larry Ellisons of this world, we're including him now because his net worth is well over $200 billion. We're bringing him back into the creeps that we talk about most. They're not the same spiritual entity. And they have a long time. They'd like to do new magenta speedboats many more lifetimes. They're not out to try to get something done by 2031 or what. I mean, they have a long time. Although sometimes it does appear that they're, they're trying to squeeze something into a timeline. I get, but that is not the way they've been over the course of history. If you observe, they've been extremely patient, even if you talk about the time between the major events. Some people say it has to do with something like 20-year Saturn return or whatever, but it is. I mean, World War I to World War II was about 20 years. I mean, I haven't gone through all of this, but the job application submission for the convenience store in 2001 was roughly 20 years, not down to the day, of course, before the next, which would mean this was 2020. The next major big one, if this is correct, would be, right around 2040. And, I think that's not the greatest date associated with somebody else's channel, but I don't know. I think the Not Milk's been, personally, I think the Not Milk's been doing this to us for forever. I mean, thousands and thousands of years. I don't think anything's going to, abruptly change in the next 30, 40, or 50 years throughout the course of our lifetime. This entity is here, and it will be here. It will be the spiritual adversary for hundreds or thousands of years, however long this place called Earth needs to exist for certain types of spirits to come here and, God forbid, I'm going to say, learn something about themselves, about how to see through a trick, about how to be better in a lot of ways. And, maybe there is at some point, maybe it can win. Maybe at some point it'll submit its statistics to whoever's watching the reality, saying, we got everybody on the ship of fools. You got everybody? Everybody's with you up there with Isaac? We got, maybe 100 years from now, we got everybody. Everybody here. Even though no Apollo mission's been back, nobody's done anything. We have everybody here. There's not one truther left. They all got out of this reality. Everybody here believes that space is exactly what it's Neil of the grass-fed, not Junior, the third. We have Mitch Pikachu the third saying the same things that were said in 2025. But now we've won. They might say everybody believes it. So some entity will come in and just say, you know what? This is the Not Milk won this one. Shut it down. Shut the whole reality down. Put the real spiritual beings in the holding tank and get them to the next game. That's probably basically what happens. Hopefully you and I will be out of here long before that. Thanks for listening.